Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where fashion was heavy, status was itchy, and the color white wasn't just for weddings. It was for wigs. Imagine entering a mirrored chamber in 17th century Versailles, where every glance carries the weight of politics. Perfume clouds the air and powder curls bounce with calculated indifference. The doors creak open. You step across polished marble floors that reflect the chandelier glow like moonlight on a lake. Your footsteps are hushed beneath the rustle of satin and brocade. Everyone turns, not because you're important, but because your hair isn't. You're bareheaded, bald, even, and that's a problem. Every man here, from dukes to debtors, sports a towering confection of horsehair, powder, and pretense. The women, their wigs rival wedding cakes. And you're an outsider. Worse, a shiny scalp one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love seeing the little constellation of night owls lighting up the map. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're handed a wig by a powdered servant whose eyebrows seem to have run away centuries ago. It's stiff, smells faintly of lavender and something less pleasant, old sheep, and as he places it carefully on your head, you feel the immediate pressure of status, heat, and horsehair. This isn't just hair. It's armor. It's currency. It's your ticket into a world where appearance is everything and reality is optional. Welcome to the powder room. You quickly learn that wigs aren't just fashion. They're political symbols, tools of disguise, even the occasional weapon in a duel. Hair pulling counts, right? The more elaborate your wig, the wealthier people assume you are. But too elaborate? That's a different problem entirely. People start wondering if you're compensating for something. Like, say, a criminal record or a really bad case of scalp rot. The fashion started, as so many disastrous trends do, with royalty. But we'll get to him next. For now, just focus on staying upright under your new burden. The wig is heavier than it looks. It's stuffed with padding, pomade, and pride. One false move and you'll knock over a tray of champagne. Or worse, bump a baroness and spark a scandal that outlives you. There's music playing, something stringy and smug. You spot a man adjusting a tiny telescope hidden inside his wig. Another one is dabbing his forehead with a powder puff. You wonder how no one sneezed yet. Then someone does, violently, and his wig flies off, revealing a shiny scalp dotted with small red sores. Nobody reacts. Not a gasp, not a whisper, because that's normal here. In fact, it might even be the origin of all this powdered nonsense. You start to wonder, how did this bizarre headwear become a symbol of civilization? A woman with an aggressively arched eyebrow approaches. "You're new," she says, peering at your wig like it's a dead rat in a teacup. Your powder's too damp. Clumps mean desperation. She glides away before you can respond. You lift a hand to feel your curls. Sure enough, they're moist. Is it sweat? Fear? You don't even know anymore. You reach for a handkerchief. Then remember that's another status symbol, embroidered, monogrammed, preferably perfumed with crushed violets and low-key trauma. As the night rolls on, you begin to understand this world. The way people glance up, not at your eyes, but your hairline. How rank is measured in ringlets. And how every powdered curl hides something. Disease, vanity, ambition, regret. A nobleman clinks glasses with you and leans in conspiratorially. "Don't scratch," he whispers. They smell fear. You laugh, softly, until he doesn't laugh back. Then you stop. Across the room, a young dandy's wig slips sideways during a bow. Gasps ripple through the hall. A servant rushes over and straightens it like a general reloading a cannon. Crisis averted. Dignity preserved. Barely. By midnight, your scalp is numb. Your posture is ruined. But somehow you fit in. You've learned the first rule of the powder room. When in doubt, fluff. You sneak a glance at yourself in the mirrored wall. You barely recognize the person looking back. Tall, pale powdered, hair like a frothy meringue of status and secrets. You belong here now. Well, almost. You're seated now, or more accurately, slumped, back straight only because your wig demands it. The candlelight flickers, catching the glint of ivory powder on your shoulders, and suddenly it hits you. Why white wigs? Why not brown or black? Or better yet, no wigs at all? It starts with a king. Of course it does. Louis XIV of France, the Sun King himself. Regal, radiant, and unfortunately, balding by the age of 17. You'd think a divine right to rule might also cover hairlines. But nature doesn't negotiate. The young king, desperate to preserve the illusion of eternal youth and glory, commissions an enormous, curling animal hair monstrosity to hide his scalp. It works. So well, in fact, that the entire court follows suit within months. When the king sneezes, France catches a cold. When the king powders his head, France becomes a bakery. You learn this from a barber named Etienne, who's currently heating wax beside you and waving a tortoiseshell comb like a conductor's baton. He speaks in a whisper, part reverence, part gossip. The king's wig had 26 curls, he says, each one signifying power. But the powder? That was new. And here comes the kicker. The powder wasn't originally for color. It was for smell. Unwashed wigs, especially ones made from goat or horsehair, reeked of death and damp. So perfumed starches and crushed herbs became standard, giving wigs their ghostly hue and floral scent. Lavender was common. Rose was noble. Cinnamon was adventurous. But it gets weirder. Some folks, particularly in Italy, use burnt walnut shells for a darker ash-gray tint. Others tried powdered bones. Not metaphorical bones. Actual bones. Historians still argue whether this was fashion, superstition, or just a very enthusiastic recycling program. You try not to gag. There's another layer. Disease. In the 1600s, Europe's syphilis epidemic was raging quietly beneath the velvet and silk. One telltale sign? Patchy hair loss. Wigs became a social camouflage, covering lesions and sparing you the humiliation of being visibly infected. You're starting to realize that in this world, beauty isn't just skin deep. It's hiding what's underneath. And yes, you guessed it, white powder helped cover more than just smell. It disguised scabs, sores, and whatever else the body didn't want to admit. The whiter the wig, the cleaner you looked, even if the truth underneath was anything but. There's irony here, of course. The color white, long associated with purity, became a symbol of strategic deception. A courtier might look like a cloud, but smell like someone that had been struck by lightning and then left in a crypt. Etienne continues his tale. At first, only kings and dukes could afford wigs, he says, fluffing a particularly tragic example on his counter. But when Charles II of England brought the style back from exile in France, the floodgates opened. Lawyers, merchants, even clergy. And then the industrial boost, wig makers organized. Schools opened. Apprentices learned to knot thousands of hairs by hand. Entire streets in London and Paris filled with wig shops, their windows cluttered with mannequin heads that stared blankly out at the soot-choked sky. You passed one on your walk later that evening. A row of disembodied heads in the window, each with a different expression: pride, disdain, mild constipation. Their wigs range from modest coils to towering cascades of powder nonsense. You half expect one to blink. And yes, people stole them. A lot. Some thieves yanked wigs off heads mid-conversation. One nobleman even had his snatched while addressing the House of Lords. The thief was never caught, but for years afterward, he was known only as the Ghost of Westminster. Historians still argue whether this theft was political protest or fashion envy. Either way, you grip your own wig a little tighter as you step back into the street. At supper, you're introduced to Madame Boucher, who claims to own 87 wigs, each named after a different Roman emperor. She's wearing Hadrian tonight, a twisted halo of silver curls that seems to hum with static. You compliment it. She nods without smiling and says, "He was my second husband's favorite." You don't ask what happened to the second husband. Instead, you focus on your soup, which tastes faintly of lemon and regret. Across the room, a man sneezes violently into his wig. No one flinches. You find yourself wondering if you'll ever adjust. Later that night, you remove your wig with shaking hands. Beneath it, your scalp is sweaty, your mood sour, and your sense of self slightly blurred. You remember how earlier a valet said, "You look more noble with it on." What does that say about you? That without 20 ounces of perfumed hair, you're just you? You lie down, staring at the ceiling, the wig perched stiffly on a mannequin beside your bed. You can still smell the powder, still feel its weight. You wonder how many secrets are caught in those strands, how many lies, how many dreams, how many moments of silent wig desperation. And as you drift off, a final thought tickles the edge of your brain, like an errant hair caught in your collar. What happens when the wig falls off? Morning in the city brings no peace, just noise, smells, and the sound of wooden heels clicking down cobblestone streets. You emerge from your rented room, wig in hand, and instantly feel underdressed. Around you, men in every direction with their powdered manis like battle banners. You're in London now, around the early 1700s, and you can tell because someone is yelling about coffee, someone else is loudly hawking authentic French powder, and a small child is dragging a basket of freshly stolen wigs like a fisherman proud of his catch. Here, wigs are more than fashion. They're social billboards. You pass a man with tight white curls arranged like a layered pastry. That's a lawyer. Across from him, a gentleman with looser, slightly yellowed waves, probably a physician. Down the street, a banker's wig is freshly powdered and stiff, shaped into symmetrical rolls like twin loaves of bread. Every profession has a style. Wigs are uniforms, just softer and more likely to catch fire near a candle. You feel a tap on your shoulder. A barber's apprentice, no older than 15, offers to refresh your presence for a penny. You hand him a coin, and in return get a cloud of rose-scented starch blasted directly into your face. Your lungs beg for mercy, but you do smell fabulous. That's when you notice something. A man crouching in an alley, whispering. He opens his coat, not to flash, thank heavens, but to reveal illicit powders. Gray, blue, even violet, smuggled from France, he says. Uncut, for gentlemen who know. You back away slowly. Wigs are now status on steroids. Not just about covering up, but showing off. The longer and thicker your wig, the more money people assume you have. They don't need to know it's rented, or shared, or stuffed with horsehair from an animal that died suspiciously. The truly wealthy? They don't powder their own wigs. They have powderers. An actual servant whose entire job is to coat your hair in a fog of fashionable white. And these servants, they wear masks, sometimes even wet sponges in their noses, to avoid inhaling the arsenic-laced powder all day. Because yes, of course, arsenic. Historians still argue whether the toxic ingredients in wig powder actually cause long-term health issues, or if the upper class was just naturally prone to dying dramatically. Either way, you develop a persistent cough. Coincidence? You're invited to a gentleman's club later, a place with no music, no dancing, and an alarming number of poodles. Inside, men drink port smoke pipes and discuss wool futures. A few are asleep in their chairs, wigs sliding gently toward their shoulders. The club's founder, Lord Whitestone, sports a triple-decker wig with side curls so elaborate they double as armrests. You ask how long it takes to get ready. 3 hours, he says. 1 hour to set it, 1 to powder it, and 1 to mentally prepare for public scrutiny. You try not to snort into your wine. The conversation drifts to wig etiquette. Apparently, it's a mortal faux pas to wear a full-dress wig to breakfast. Another man shares a story about his uncle being socially exiled for showing up to a wedding with judge's wig, a professional style worn at a party. You gasp. Everyone nods solemnly, like he confessed to treason. It turns out that wig culture has unwritten rules stacked higher than the wigs themselves. Certain curls for certain times. Certain powders for certain seasons. If you were the wrong type in the wrong place, you may as well tattoo "I'm nouveau riche" across your forehead. It's overwhelming, and somehow incredibly entertaining. Later that day, a constable stops you. "Wig license?" he asks. You blink. Yes, wig licenses were real, at least in some cities, especially when governments realized they could tax not the wig itself, but the powder, an elegant form of robbery dressed up in parchment and stamps. You dig into your coat and produce the crumpled slip. He sniffs, shrugs, and waves you on. You're left wondering, how did something that began with lice and insecurity evolve into a full-blown bureaucracy? Maybe it's the same instinct that gives us designer shoes, phone upgrades, or overly complex coffee orders. The desire to belong and to signal it. Loudly, powderedly. You're staying with a modest tradesman named Mr. Firth. He's kind, quiet, and wears a slightly uneven gray wig that smells faintly of oatmeal. One evening, over stew, he explains how wig trends filter down the social ladder. You can tell who's rising, he says. First, their hat gets taller. Then their shoes get shinier. Then one day, they walk with a white wig, stiff as pride. You nod, chewing slowly. He adds, some of them skip meals to afford it. That stays with you. Next day, you pass a ragged man standing beside a pawn shop, staring into the window at a slightly moth-eaten peruke. He reaches into his coat, counts his coins, and walks away. Still bald, still proud. As you return home that evening, the streets are littered with powder trails. A group of boys plays catch the curl, using a wig found in the gutter. One throws it like a discus. Another wears it like a hat. You can't help but laugh. But then a carriage rushes past, splashing muddy water onto your breeches and your wig. The powder melts. The scent curdles. You freeze. 3 ladies nearby titter behind fans. And you realize, in this city, wet wigs mean more than discomfort. They mean disgrace. You flee the scene like a powdered fugitive, ducking into the nearest shop that doesn't sell leeches or roasted eels. It's a barber wigmaker's den, warm with the smells of candle wax, burnt starch, and what you hope is lavender. The bell above the door jingles. Heads turn. You stand there, soaked, embarrassed, your once pristine wig sagging like a wet sheet. A gentleman in the corner lifts an eyebrow, so high it nearly enters his wig. He whispers to his companion, who chuckles behind his cup of thick, suspiciously gray tea. You're greeted by the shopkeeper, a cheerful man named Gilbert, whose own wig is short, precise, and smells strongly of cloves. Bad splash, he asks, not unkindly. You nod. He grins. Happens more often than you think, especially to beginners. He motions for you to sit. You do, grateful for the offer and for the distance from your humiliation. Gilbert claps his hands, and 2 apprentices rush over with towels, powders, and a kind of wig-shaped drying rack that looks like it belongs in a medieval torture chamber. As they begin to work, you become aware of your own neck, specifically how it aches. Your shoulders are stiff, and your spine feels like it's been replaced with a wooden dowel. You glance around the shop. Every customer has the same posture. Back straight, necks rigid, heads tilted at just the right angle to keep their wigs aligned. One man holds a teacup with both hands. Not because he's dainty, but because lifting one hand would send his headpiece tumbling sideways. Posture is the price of fashion, Gilbert says, catching your glance. A stiff neck means high status. You want to say something witty, but your muscles are too sore. The apprentices begin dusting you with powder, generously. This blend smells like crushed jasmine and sugar cookies. You sneeze 3 times and temporarily lose vision in one eye. Gilbert hands you a lace-edged cloth. Delicate tissues weren't invented yet, he says, so we use whatever's pretty. A man enters the shop dramatically, cape swirling, face flushed. He's late for court, he bellows, and his wig is tangled from last night's. Well, he doesn't say, but everyone in the room nods knowingly. He slams a snuff box on the counter and demands a snuff wake-up. Gilbert obliges, blowing a dash of brown powder into man's nostrils. The man snorts, jerks upright like a reanimated corpse, and immediately begins ranting about inheritance law. You blink. Gilbert shrugs, snuffs the espresso of the powdered age. And speaking of powders, there are so many. Behind the counter, dozens of jars glimmer under lantern light. Crushed violet, orange zest, even powdered amber. Some claim to cure baldness. Others are meant to deter fleas. One blend contains just enough mercury to give you a pleasant flush, if you don't die first. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were genuinely medicinal or just the 18th century equivalent of Instagram filters. You're not sure either way, but you make a mental note not to lick your collar. Your chair is now surrounded by discarded wig pins, stray curls, and empty powder puffs. You feel like a freshly groomed poodle. A very respected poodle, but still. Gilbert offers you tea while you wait. You sip it slowly and observe your fellow customers. In one corner, 2 courtiers whisper over a powder recipe said to be used by Marie Antoinette herself. Mint and crushed sugar pearls. In another, a clerk with ink-stained fingers asks if there's a way to dye his wig blue to match the new parliamentary drapes. Yes, Gilbert replies, but people will talk. The clerk nods. Good. There's something ritualistic here. This isn't just grooming. It's a daily transformation, a shedding of your human flaws, and a reconstruction of your public identity. The more powdered you are, the less human you become. You're not meant to sweat, scratch, or sneeze. You're meant to glide, nod, and smirk. Gilbert tells you of a recent trend among young nobles. Powdered mustaches. Not real ones, but little paste-on affairs, dusted in lavender and glue beneath the nose. They wilt in the rain, he says, which is somehow part of the charm. You sigh, as your wig is set back in place. Bouncier and fluffier than ever, you're handed a snuff box. A trial sample, apparently. Inside, rose-scented tobacco with gold flakes. You fake a sneeze and pocket it. The shop bell jingles again, and in walks a woman so tall her wig nearly brushes the doorframe. It's shaped like a galleon, complete with sails. You swear you see a tiny cannon. Everyone stares. Even Gilbert bows slightly. Countess du Villon, he whispers. She once wore a powder farm on her head. With sheep. You nod solemnly, as if this makes perfect sense. The Countess glides past, her eyes never meeting yours. She doesn't have to look. Her wig does the talking. It says, I am money, absurdity, and unspoken scandal, all at once. You leave the shop later, head high, curls bouncing like a bakery window display. Your neck still hurts. Your ego, though, slightly restored. As you step back into the street, a breeze lifts a puff of powder from your shoulder and into the face of a passing gentleman. He gasps. You nod. He nods back. Respect achieved. You walk the London streets with renewed pride, head bobbing slightly under your freshly fluffed curls. The air is damp, but not enough to undo Gilbert's handiwork. Your wig holds like a champ. And that's when you notice something subtle but strange. Not all wigs are truly white. Sure, at first glance, the whole city looks like a bakery exploded. But under closer scrutiny, some wigs shimmer faintly blue in the lamplight. Others lean ivory cream or ghostly gray. One gentleman's hair looks like it was dipped in chalk and then gently rolled in pearl dust. You pause beside a shop window and catch your reflection. The powder is luminous, but not uniformly so. The crown of your wig has a slight lavender tint. Is that intentional? Inside the shop, a chalkboard sign explains it all. New this season, oyster gray, candlelight ivory, ashen snow. That's right. Wig fashion has undertones now. Just like modern hair dye ads, 18th century powders came in a spectrum of so-called whites. The difference wasn't just aesthetic, it was symbolic. Ash gray? Serious and stoic. Bone white? Aristocratic. Hints of pink? Scandalous flirt. And if your wig had a hint of blue, it meant you were bold, young, and possibly French, which could go either way depending on the politics. Historians still argue whether these subtle shades were the result of deliberate recipe experimentation or happy accidents that turned into trendsetters. Either way, once nobles started noticing each other's signature hues, wig color became a language all its own. You stopped to watch two gentlemen argue on the steps of a bank. One has a stark white wig that practically glows. The other sports a slightly sootier look with blue-gray undertones. The shouting intensifies. It's about a loan, or a mistress, or maybe the wrong shade of powder. You can't quite tell. But when one of them gestures dismissively and sneers, your curls look beige, the other gasps like he's been stabbed. This is serious business. Later, you visit a powderer's stall in Covent Garden. The man behind the booth has a stained apron and a cart of open jars, each labeled like perfume, whisper frost, moonlit lilac, dead dove gray, a personal favorite. You lean in, curious. He offers you a tester puff. You choose something called opera mist. It smells like crushed herbs and candle wax. You sneeze again. The powderer chuckles. Strong nose. You must be new. He tells you how recipes were family secrets, passed down like spells. Some powderers added tiny traces of bluebell or charcoal to shift the tone. Others blended in flecks of silver dust or finely crushed oyster shell. One man in Bath even sold a diamond powder, so expensive only 3 people in England could afford it, and 2 of them died of mercury poisoning. The powderer shrugs. Worth it, though. Sparkle like a chandelier. You learn that the same base powders, starch, rice flour, or finely milled chalk, could be modified endlessly. Rich folks preferred smoother, silkier textures, while the working class got the coarser blends. Add in oil of roses, dried orange peel, or pulverized ambergris, and suddenly your head smelled like Versailles or fish guts, depending on the budget. That night, you attend a play at Drury Lane. The lights are low, the crowd rowdy, and the wigs magnificent. You spot at least a dozen tones of white in the audience. A woman 2 rows ahead wears a powdered wig with streaks of gold leaf curled into the shape of musical notes. Every time she laughs, they shimmer. The play is loud and slapstick, with jokes about powdered judges, greasy lawyers, and an entire scene where a character accidentally uses snuff powder as face powder and faints dramatically. The audience roars. You do too, until you realize the man beside you is crying. Not sobbing, just gently leaking from both eyes. You glance over. He notices and sighs. Talc allergies, he says. The fashion gods are cruel, and they are, because the powder, however elegant, doesn't stay on your wig. It floats. It clings. It settles into your clothes, your teacup, your lungs. Everything you touch ends up dusted, faintly ghosted. You wipe your sleeve and leave a handprint. When you sneeze, it's like puffing into a flour sack. This isn't just a cosmetic choice. It's an environmental hazard. You return to your lodging where your host, a snippy former milliner, insists you depowder before bed. You're handed a soft brush, a bowl of vinegar water, and a towel. It's like cleaning a bird cage made of your pride. As you gently scrub, you realize something unnerving. Your scalp has started to itch, not just from powder or sweat, but from living things. You remember Gilbert's offhand warning. Don't skip washing. That's how you get wig mites. Mites. In your wig, you resist the urge to scream. Instead, you toss the wig onto the nearest chair, where it lands with a soft thud, trailing powder. In the flickering candlelight, it looks less like a fashion accessory and more like something alive. Something watching you. But then again, you're tired. Maybe it's just the arsenic fumes getting to you. You lie down, breathing through your mouth. Try to ignore the faintly floral cloud hovering in the air. In the dark, your head feels weirdly light without its powdered crown, almost naked. You wonder how long you'll keep this up. The daily powdering, the next strain, the risk of mites, mercury, and fashion disgrace. And yet, you already know the answer. Tomorrow, you'll wear ashen snow. Morning comes with a damp chill and the sound of hooves clattering over cobblestones. You crack open the shutters and watch London exhale. Chimneys coughing smoke, errand boys hollering, and somewhere nearby, a woman shrieking that someone's wig has been tarnished beyond repair. Today, you decide to explore a different part of town, the underbelly of the powder trade. Not everyone gets their wigs from elegant shops with velvet curtains and gold brushes. No. Beneath the surface, there's a whole black market for powdered luxury, where bakers moonlight as barbers, smugglers sell off-label lavender, and half the wigs in circulation are made from questionably sourced horsehair. You start in Covent Garden again, but this time you follow the flower dust, not to salon, but to the rear of a bakery. The sign reads, "Pies and powder, ask for Pierre." You knock. A slit opens. Two eyes squint at you. You look like you overpaid for ash gray. The voice mutters. Then the door creaks open. Inside, flour sacks double as wig storage. The air smells like cinnamon, yeast, and lies. A man with a half-powdered face greets you, tossing a wig onto a baking tray, as if it were a croissant. "This one's for a footman," he says. "They only want the front to look good. Back doesn't matter." You nod slowly, unsure whether to laugh or run. Pierre, as it turns out, was once a royal baker in France before escaping a failed souffle and a political scandal involving undercooked pheasant. He now makes his living selling repurposed baking flour as wig powder. "Not for bread anymore," he whispers. "Powder's more profitable, less chewy. But here's the catch. The British government has caught on. During the height of the powder craze, flour shortages led to actual riots. People starved while nobles wore edible hairstyles. Laws were passed. Bakers were warned. But some, like Pierre, saw an opportunity. Historians still argue whether these powder riots were genuine acts of desperation or cleverly orchestrated stunts by anti-aristocratic agitators. Either way, one thing's certain. Don't mess with people's bread to feed someone's ego. Pierre shows you a trick. He dips a wig into a mixture of flour, chalk, and a pinch of soot for contrast. The result? A fashionable two-tone effect that looks intentional. Until it rains. Customers never know, he says, until the wig starts to rise. You ask if this kind of deception is common. He laughs. You think judges wear clean wigs? Half those barristers rent them from grave robbers with brushes. You're about to ask what he means when a lanky man bursts through the back door, breathless. "We've got a sweep," he gasps. 2 powder stalls busted. They're checking flower licenses. Pierre curses in French and throws a towel over a suspiciously shiny mound of wigs. "Time to go," he mutters. You're hurried through a narrow alleyway, past hanging linens and squawking pigeons. Your shoes squelch through puddles, some of which smell faintly like egg yolk and shame. Eventually, you emerge in a meat district, looking very out of place in your refined curls and powdered shoulders. A butcher eyes you suspiciously. "Wigman," he grunts. You nod hesitantly. He points to the back. You want to see the fox. You're not sure what that means, but curiosity wins. Behind the butcher stall, through a curtain of animal hides, is a workshop filled with her scraps, curling irons, and more powder than a House of Lords during budget season. A woman sits at a bench, weaving strands of fox fur into the base of a wig. "Red fur for red cheeks," she mutters. Makes the wearer seem warm-blooded. Trustworthy. You ask if that's a real thing. She snorts. It's marketing. This is where things blur. Fur from animals, human hair from prisons, thread stolen from monasteries. You're standing in the gray space where fashion meets fraud, where elegance is stitched by those society won't look in the eye. You watch as a ratty old wig is trimmed, dyed, and powdered until it looks nearly identical to something you saw at court last week. There's a craft to it, a dark kind of magic, and people are willing to pay. Desperate footmen, climbing merchants, daughters preparing for marriage interviews, even clergy who, despite vows of humility, can't resist a nicely curled sideburn. The woman holds up a finished piece. "This one," she says, "will be worn in Parliament. They'll debate taxation while breathing in weasel fur and oat flour." You leave the alley workshop with a fresh respect for the underworld of wig economy. It's not just luxury for the rich. It's hustle, it's survival, and it's powered by a powder economy so fragile, one shipment of bad starch could topple a noble social standing. Later, at Quiet Tavern, you overhear 2 young men whispering about whitening cuts and scent knockoffs. Apparently, someone selling counterfeit violet powder. A dupe, cheaper, grittier, and likely full of lime. You swirl your wine and realize the truth. Powder wigs aren't fashion, they're theater. Elaborate masks for fragile egos, propped up by flour, fur, and false confidence. You head home, head buzzing, scalp slightly itchy. Tonight, before bed, you brush out your wig with care. Each stroke sends a faint shimmer of powder into the candlelight. You wonder where the powder came from. A bakery? A fox? A scandal? You may never know. But tomorrow you'll wear anyway. You wake to scratching. Not dramatic, horror movie scratching. More like a dry, quiet rustle, as if someone is gently combing parchment near your ear. You sit up. Your wig rests on the nightstand, motionless, but somehow ominous. You lean in, sniff. Nothing unusual, just that same faint scent of lavender, chalk, and regret. Still, something feels off. You remember what Gilbert said. Mites, lice, even leprosy, if you listen to the more theatrical rumors. Because yes, for all their pomp and powdered glory, wigs were walking petri dishes. Lice loved them. Lice thrived in them, especially when owners refused to clean them properly, or at all. Some men would rather toss a wig out a window than admit they had insects in their curls. Others hired wig specialists just to delouse their hairpieces with combs and fine ash. You've read that King Louis XV supposedly had a powder valet whose only job was to maintain the royal wigs. This included disinfecting them, brushing them, and once, a rumor says, boiling them. Historians still argue whether this was an exaggeration or a deeply distressed attempt at hygiene. You resolve to clean your wig today, but first, you take a morning walk to the marketplace, where powdered heads bob like cupcakes. That's when you spot it, a sign outside a barrister's office. Wig law, know your rights. Intrigued, you enter. Inside, two men are arguing loudly over the ownership of a wig that was borrowed indefinitely after a masquerade ball. One claims it was a gift. The other says it was stolen mid-waltz. A judge, seated behind a desk and wearing the world's most judicial pile of gray curls, sighs and bangs a small gavel. In the matter of verminal assault, he begins. Wait, what? Turns out that the real charge, vermin-based assault, filed when one man's infested wig allegedly passed lice to another during a shared carriage ride. The plaintiff claims emotional distress and scalp trauma. The defendant insists his lice are not litigious. You sit in the back row, fascinated. The judge rules in favor of the plaintiff. The courtroom erupts in polite clapping. Afterwards, a clerk hands you a pamphlet, Wig Etiquette and Liability, a modern gentleman's guide. You flip through it. Apparently, there are rules for everything. Wig tipping, only at funerals. Wig adjusting in public, discouraged. Sharing wigs, never. Lending wigs to actors, risky. And underlined in red, always powder before appearing in court. You think about how fragile this whole system is, an elaborate dance of social codes where one misstep, one lice outbreak, can land you in court. Later that day, you stop by a laundry, hoping to clean your wig. The washerwoman takes one look and snorts. No, she says, that's curse. You blink. She gestures you inside and points to a back room. There on a hook hangs a melting wig. That's the only word for it. Damp, deflated, and sagging. She calls it the widowmaker. Its last owner, she says, wore it during a humid summer wedding. Refused to admit it needed a rest. Sweated right through the base. Molded. Caught lice. Died scratching. You wonder how much of this is folklore and how much is fungal fact. Historians still argue whether wig-related illnesses were genuinely lethal or just convenient scapegoats for bad hygiene and worse luck. Either way, you're not taking chances. You buy a new brush, a jar of rosemary oil, and a packet of something labeled herbal fumigator for the discerning head. It smells like crushed mint in desperation. That evening, you sit beside your candle, methodically brushing your wig like it's a sleeping pet. Each stroke releases a puff of powder, and possibly a few secrets. You notice a small stain near the base. Could be wine, could be something worse. You dab it gently with vinegar water, whispering apologies. This feels less like cleaning and more like penance. And it's not just you. Wig maintenance was a social duty. Barbers, valets, even entire salons specialize in cleaning, repowdering, and reshaping wigs. Some high-ranking men had travel wigs and court wigs and morning wigs, each stored in a label case lined with velvet. A few even had seasonal rotation. Lighter curls for summer, heavier ones for winter warmth and intimidation. You once overheard a nobleman say, "A clean wig is a clean soul." He was mostly drunk, but still. You finish your cleaning, set the wig to rest on its porcelain headstand, and feel something strange. Pride, not because you look better, but because you survived another day in a society where identity lives on your scalp, and a speck of dandruff can destroy your reputation. You crawl into bed, breathing in the faint scent of mint and vinegar. The candle flickers, shadows dancing across the walls like powdered ghosts. You think about the man in court, the one who sued over lice, and you wonder, if your wig caught vermin tonight, would you sue? Probably not. You'd just whisper curses and go see Pierre. You wake up sweating. It's the middle of summer, and even without your wig, the air feels thick, like soup left on the stove too long. London's heat is not kind, especially to anyone foolish enough to wrap their skull in several pounds of horsehair, wool, and powder. But you have an appointment. Today, You're attending a garden fete thrown by a minor noble, one of those carefully curated events where everyone pretends not to judge your wardrobe while silently ranking your curls. You steel yourself, apply powder carefully, rose today with a pinch of clove, and place your now clean wig on your head. It immediately begins to trap heat. You can feel the sweat forming under your temples before you've even left your room. By the time you arrive, your cravat is damp, your wig is starting to wilt, and you develop a persistent itch behind your right ear. You ignore it. The garden is a sea of parasols and powdered faces. Under the sun, everyone glows, but not with health, more like slow baking. You lock eyes with another guest across the lawn, a portly man in a towering wig so elaborate it has visible steam rising from the top. He lifts a fan to his face, not for modesty, for survival. You try to mingle, but all anyone wants to talk about is how hot it is. One woman whispers, "I saw someone's wig slip off during the lemon race." Another sighs, "We lost 2 poodles. They melted." You spot a young man standing by a hedgerow, discreetly removing the back pins of his wig to let air in. It's like opening a window on a submarine. And that's when it hits you. This entire crowd is suffering silently. Because they have to. Because to remove your wig in public would be like removing your dignity. Or worse, exposing your real hair, which might be thinning, graying, or, horror of horrors, natural. You wander toward the refreshment tent, dodging the melted remains of what might have once been a pastry tower. There, 2 gentlemen argue over whether to allow fans in Parliament. One insists they're effeminate. The other, mopping his neck with a lace handkerchief, counters that heat stroke is terribly unmanly too. Nearby, a wig begins to lift sideways on a lady's head. She doesn't notice. Her maid does. And in a single, elegant motion, the servant slides a wig back into place mid-curtsy. It's a rescue maneuver with all the precision of a military drill. You sip warm lemonade and take it all in. The heat, the fluffed misery, the slow decline of composure. You're reminded of something Gilbert once said. The higher the hair, the closer to collapse. He meant it metaphorically, but also not. And the thing is, you're not just hot, you're itchy. You try not to scratch. You really do. But after the 3rd hour in the sun, something beneath your wig starts crawling. Not metaphorically. Actually, crawling. You excuse yourself and flee to the shade of a laurel hedge, yanking the wig off and shaking it violently. A small bug, possibly a flea, possibly judgment itself, leaps out and disappears into the grass. You freeze. You've broken the unspoken rule. You've doigged in public. You brace for scandal. But no one sees you. Or if they do, they pretend not to. Because under the sun, even the strictest social rules bend. You sit there, your scalp steaming, watching a row of nobles fan themselves with such desperation their powder is beginning to cake in little drifts under their wigs. One man sneezes and leaves a chalky puff on the tablecloth. You begin to understand why people accidentally lose wigs in fountains. That happened once at a palace ball. You're told later. A viscount tripped into a reflecting pool and emerged dramatically wigless, claiming a divine vision told him to go bald. Historians still argue whether it was intentional rebellion or just heat exhaustion in velvet shoes. Either way, the trend caught on briefly. The natural head movement. A few brave souls tried it. Artists, radicals, one undertaker. But society snapped back quickly. No one wanted to see a forehead with wrinkles or, heaven forbid, honesty. You finally reaffix your wig, but looser this time. You let the back flap a little, like a tiny curtain of shame. And honestly, it feels nice, like a breeze of rebellion. Back at the refreshment tent, someone collapses into a faint. The culprit? Overpowdering. Her maid fans her furiously while others dab their brows and whisper about switching to starch-free blends. You hear murmurs about wig cooling pouches, little sachets of mint and crushed ice sewn into the inner lining. One man has a tiny copper fan hidden under his curls. It buzzes softly, and you envy him deeply. But mostly, people just suffer because in this world, to be seen as undone is worse than being unconscious. As the sun dips, you watch guests stagger home like survivors of a fashionable battlefield. Their wigs are sagging. Their powder has streaked. One nobleman's curls have fused together into what looks like a powdered helmet. Back at your quarters, you pull your wig off of the groan. Steam rises. The mirror shows a red line circling your forehead where the base pressed too tightly. You mutter, "Never again." Then you brush it out, hang it gently, and sigh. Of course you'll wear it again. Tomorrow, because the only thing more unbearable than the heat is being seen without it. You're in a courtroom now, not as a criminal, thankfully, but as an observer, though you begin to suspect even that role requires a certain level of powdered formality. You're seated behind a defendant's bench, your newly combed wig perched just so, and around you, everything radiates solemnity, pomposity, and the faint musk of starch. This is where wigs go to work. Here, in the British legal system, the powdered wig isn't just for show. It's part of the job description. The judge, lawyers, and even some witnesses are crowned in stiff, looped curls, carefully maintained and subtly color-coded. You notice the differences immediately. The judge wears a full-bottomed wig, long, flowing, majestic. It's like a lion's mane made of antique parchment. The barrister sports shorter versions, tight curls at the side, trimmed clean at the neck. And in the gallery, a few clerks wear half wigs, just enough to show deference without drawing attention. And you're feeling deeply undercurled. As the trial begins, you start paying more attention to the wigs and the words. Every nod causes a rustle. Every objection is delivered with a ceremonial flick of the curls. When the judge leans forward to raise an eyebrow, the whole bench seems to tilt under the sheer authority of his coiffure. The case is about property boundaries, something about a misplaced hedge and a goat, but no one seems to care. All eyes are on the wigs. You overhear a whispered commentary from a man nearby. See the judge's powder? Not standard. That's pearl gray. Expensive stuff. Another murmurs. That junior barrister fluffed too much this morning. Looks like he's been rolling in pastry. It hits you. This courtroom isn't about justice. It's about performance. And the wigs? They're costumes. Uniforms of power. Tools of intimidation. And perhaps a protective layer between self and system. There's history here, too. You recall that court wigs in Britain became standardized during the late 1600s. They were seen as professional, neutral, and above all, dignified. To appear in court without one was like showing up to a duel without a sword, or worse, without a metaphor. Historians still argue whether the original goal was to create order or simply to keep the hairless elite from being mocked by the public. You can see both arguments in action today. At recess, you speak to a clerk polishing a row of wigs with what looks like a giant toothbrush. He tells you judges often have multiple wigs. Formal ones for high-profile cases, simpler ones for rural sessions. And barristers? Many rent theirs. Some even share. You try not to look horrified. The clerk confides that years ago, someone sued a fellow lawyer for powder theft. Apparently, a rare and expensive blend had gone missing, and the thief was caught when his wig smelled too clean. They settled out of court. Back inside, the judge returns. He adjusts his wig slowly, deliberately, and resumes the trial with the kind of gravity normally reserved for exorcisms. When he finally passes judgment on the hedge, not the goat, it feels like a decree from Olympus. And it's not just Britain. Across Europe, wigs made their way into various civic roles, Clergy, academics, politicians, even town criers. Because the more fishy you looked, the more people believed you. You remember reading about a German bishop who refused to remove his wig even during confession, claiming it helped him hear better from God. Historians still argue whether he was being sincere or just deeply insecure about his scalp. Either way, wigs gave people authority and anonymity and, occasionally, plausible deniability. You head out into the fog, the courtroom echoing behind you, and feel strangely comforted by your own wig. Not because it looks good, it doesn't, but because it makes you part of something. A tribe, a tradition, a fabric of powdered rolls and spoken ritual. You pass a young woman in academic robes, clearly rushing to a lecture. Her wig is modest, tight-curled, slightly askew. She notices your stare and grins. "It's awful, right?" she says. "But when I wear it, people actually listen." And there it is again, that strange magic of synthetic hair and social control. The wig, however ridiculous, gives you weight. You could be anyone under here. A scholar, a scoundrel, a judge, a joke. You head home, mind buzzing with court protocols and powder hierarchies. Back in your room, you remove your wig carefully, as if taking off a helmet. It leaves a faint indentation around your temples. A groove. You think. That's where the world presses in. It starts, as these things often do, with a whisper. You're attending a quiet evening salon in a well-furnished parlor somewhere near Westminster. The crowd is powder, perfumed, and perpetually trying to impress one another. There's poetry, a plate of peeled grapes, and the ever-present sound of fans fluttering like nervous birds. Then someone leans over and mutters, "Have you seen Lord Ashcombe's wig? Looks like he borrowed it from a stable boy." Laughter tinkles. Someone gasps. And just like that, you're swept into the elite sport of the season, wig politics. Because in this powdered world, a curl can cost a career. Lord Ashcombe enters a moment later, entirely unaware he's already been verbally executed. His wig, slightly limp at the edges, a little uneven in the back, is immediately clocked by every eye in the room. It's not bad, just not perfect. And perfection is currency. You watch the damage unfold in real time. Conversations dry up around him. Invitations vanish. One lady actually turns her back. The man's influence, weeks in the making, melts away like rouge in the rain. You whisper to your host, "Is it always this brutal?" He smiles. You've no idea. As it turns out, the 18th century elite didn't just use wigs for status. They used them as weapons. Entire rivalries played out through curls, partings, and powder texture. A slight tweak to your wig, too high, too white, too scented, and suddenly people thought you were mocking the Queen, or the clergy, or Parliament, or, worst of all, fashion itself. Historians still argue whether these social punishments were coordinated by jealous rivals or simply the natural response of society addicted to subtle warfare. Either way, it was deadly. Metaphorically, you learn that some nobles paid stylists just to spy on their enemies' wig choices and then plan strategic responses. One baron in Bath famously wore a mirror-image wig to a rival's gala, effectively turning himself into a fashionable insult. It worked. The other man left town for a year. Tonight, you're staying quiet, watching. The salon's host is Lord Werner, a man known for his strategic bon mots and impeccably understated wigs. No towering curls, just precision, like a quiet sword. You overhear a conversation near the tea service. A young duke says, "My cousin wore a powdered pigtail to the royal dinner." Everyone gasps. "No one does pigtails anymore," a lady hisses. "It's like wearing last year's lace." Someone fans themselves with exaggerated horror. The Duke shrugs. Well, he's in Vienna now. Hiding. You retreat to the hallway. Overwhelmed. You're beginning to see that these wigs aren't just fashion statements, they're minefields. Back in your lodgings, your landlady is reading the paper by candlelight. She waves you over. Listen to this, she says. Gentlemen challenge a duel after referring to rivals' curls as provincial. You read over her shoulder. It's true. Two nobles, both hoping for political appointments, ended up in a duel at dawn over a wig insult. One of them called the other's curls clumpy. The other demanded satisfaction. The paper says they both survived, one with a pierced ego, the other with a slightly trimmed ear. You shake your head. Isn't that a bit much? She snorts. You've never had your powder compare to pastry crumbs. Fair point. It's not just men, either. In courtly circles, women's wigs are political arsenals. Entire treaties have hinged on hairstyle harmony. At one Austrian gathering, a duchess supposedly sparked months of diplomatic tension by appearing in a wig 2 inches higher than the empress's. Apology required. Several florists were fired. One milliner fled the country. There's even a rumor that during the build-up to the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette's elaborate coiffures, styled like ships, gardens, even military victories, were so extravagant they became symbols of tone-deaf aristocracy. Historians still argue whether the wigs helped ignite rebellion or merely highlighted the already smoldering rage of a hungry population. Either way, those curls didn't age well. Back in your room, you polish your own wig with unusual care. Tonight's powder's fauve pearl, subtle, serious, slightly aloof. You blend it with a dash of lemon zest, not enough to be playful, just enough to say, I pay attention. You think about your own place in this powdered ecosystem. Not a noble, not a rebel, just someone navigating the social currents of curl politics. You recall what the young scholar told you outside the courtroom. When I wear it, people listen. But what if they're only listening to the wig? You stare into the mirror, brush in hand, and wonder who's really in charge. The person underneath or the powder persona you built strand by strand. Outside, the city winds down. Lanterns flicker. Wigs are stored on stands, their curls gently loosening in the midnight air. Somewhere nearby, someone is still arguing over side partings. You lie down, careful not to disturb your freshly fluffed curls. One arm behind your head, you sigh. It's exhausting. Not the wearing, the pretending. And yet tomorrow, you'll rise. Powder, and politic. Again, you travel to the outskirts today, somewhere foggy and less polished, where alleys grow narrow and the scent of roasting chestnuts competes with something more musky, fox fur, old pomade, and gossip. You've heard whispers of the wigmaker's quarter, where powdered elegance is born, not in marble salons, but behind soot-smudged windows and over callous hands. You arrive at a street called Crookshank Lane. There's no sign, just a row of squat, leaning houses with tiny attic windows, many of which are filled with disembodied heads. Wig stands, yes, but still eerie in the half-light. You knock on a blue door. It creaks open without a word, and you're immediately pulled into a world of curls and cauldrons. This isn't a shop. It's a workshop. The floor creaks underfoot. Hair clippings litter every surface. And in the middle of it all stands a woman with wiry gray hair and hands that don't stop moving, not even as she greets you. First time, she asks, threading a needle through a patch of weasel fur. You nod. I'm Magda, she says. Wig maker. Which, depending on who's asking. She grins. You're not entirely sure if she's joking. You watch as she sews real human hair, curly auburn, into a fine mesh cap. Prison hair, she says casually. Lads will sell it for a week's wages. Or a boiled egg. The tools on her bench are ancient. Bone combs, ivory curl rods, brass pins. But beside them, a rabbit's foot, a string of garlic, a jar labeled Fox Ash. You glance at her. Superstition, you ask. She shrugs. A good wig needs more than thread. It needs intention. Historians still argue whether wig makers like Magda were true mystics or just savvy marketers playing to fears of a superstitious clientele. But when she mutters to the wig before powdering it, "Hold your shape, carry their lies," you feel the hairs on your neck rise. There's a knock at the door. A man enters, draped in black, eyes darting. He places a satchel on the counter and mutters, "Needs to look noble. Tomorrow night." Magda doesn't ask questions. She opens a satchel and pulls out a child-sized wig, pale, soft, and eerily perfect. Is this for... The man cuts you off with a look. Don't. Later, Magda shows you her specialty rack, a shelf of wigs designed not just for style, but for deception. One has padding in the crown to make the wearer appear taller. Another is treated with ash to dull its shine, for sorrowful appearances, she says. There's one with fox fur lining, not for warmth but for boldness. She claims fox forgive the wearer courage. They start walking differently. She says, talking sharper, like the animal still whispering in their ear. You raise an eyebrow. She just shrugs. Sometimes belief does the work for me. It's not just wigs she sells. It's stories, transformations, disguises. One customer wants to look older. Another wants to seem more military. A third, he wants to disappear. She sells him a short, undistinguished gray number. No one notices gray, she says. You begin to understand. Wigs aren't always about standing out. Sometimes they're about hiding in plain sight. Magda shows you a drawer of failed attempts. Burnt curls, melted mesh, one wig that smells like wet dog and cinnamon. Experimentation. She says, fashion is just fear with accessories. And in the corner, covered in velvet, sits her masterpiece. She pulls the cloth away slowly. It's massive, towering, pale gold, curled into shapes that defy architecture. There are tiny pearls sewn into the ringlets, a miniature violin tucked behind one ear. The powder glimmers faintly with, what is that? Silver? Crushed mica? It's never been worn, she says. Too powerful. Whoever wears this becomes a god. Or worse. Thinks they are. You shiver. You leave Magda's workshop just before dusk. The city looks different now. Less like a stage and more like a mask. Every powdered head you pass feels charged. Are their wigs honest? Enchanted? Made from lies? You stop in front of a tavern mirror. Look at yourself. Look past the curls. What are you trying to say with this thing on your head? Who are you becoming? That night, as you brush your wig in silence, you find a tiny stitch near the back. Just one, but it wasn't there before. It's shaped like a sigil. You stare at it, heartbeat slowing, and you think, Magda's hands are faster than mine. Palace air smells different. Not because it's cleaner, but because it's been filtered through brocade, beeswax, and centuries of nervous servants. Today, you've been summoned, well invited, but let's be honest, when nobility beckons, you show up. You're standing just inside the service wing of a royal residence. A steward hands you a small slip of parchment and murmurs, "You'll be observing the rotation." You blink. Rotation of what? He smiles. Wigs. And so begins your descent into the wheeled wig economy of court life. You're led down a corridor where walls are lined with racks. Hundreds of wigs arranged by size, curl, powder type, and mood. You spot one labeled Solemn Thursdays and another simply tagged Bluster. This is the palace's communal supply, the steward explains. Not everyone here owns their own. You stop in your tracks. Wait, they share them? He nods. Not the royals, of course, but lower nobles, visiting dignitaries, lesser clergy. They borrow from the racks. You stare down a row of tight curls that probably sat atop at least 10 different heads this week. And here's the kicker. Some aren't clean between uses. The steward shrugs. We brush. We powder. We bless, sometimes. You feel slightly ill. He ushers you into a preparation room where a valet is busy restyling a wig in panic. Apparently, the duke it was prepped for sneezed it out of shape before a diplomatic meeting. I need the ringlet fork, the valet mutters, and the dry puff. You spot a massive silver container labeled Midnight Lavender Dust. The steward leans in. That powder's been in use since the last king. The scent is legally traditional. Historians still argue whether these shared wig systems existed in all major courts or were unique to especially crowded palaces like Versailles. But it's clear that, here at least, identity is often rented. The wig valet explains that courtiers typically rotate through 3 tiers of wigs per week. Court day wigs, regal, polished, intimidating, worn for royal appearances or when trying to get a bill passed. Salon wigs, looser curls, conversational volume, for poetry readings or strategic flirtation. Shadow wigs, less defined, less powdered, used when visiting someone discreetly or when mourning is politically convenient. You're allowed to handle one from a second tier. It's soft, faintly perfumed, and surprisingly warm. You wonder if it remembers the heads it's known, the secrets whispered while it listened. Later, you meet Madame Tessin, a senior dresser who oversees wig assignments for visiting officials. She tells you about her tracking system, a giant ledger that lists not just names and sizes, but temperaments. A man with aggressive curls last week requested a calmer silhouette this time, to appear more reasonable during trade talks. She once denied a bishop the use of a double braid because, as she put it, he hadn't earned the volume. Madame Tessin believes every curl should match character. If your mouth lies, she says, at least your hair should tell the truth. Then she laughs. Though, mostly, it's the other way around. She shows you a secret drawer, wigs reserved for emergencies. Ones that can age you up, make you look slightly wealthier, or subtly mirror the hairstyle of someone you want to impress. You'd be surprised how often they come in handy, she says. When a man wants forgiveness or a favor, or simply to disappear in a crowd. You ask if anyone ever forgets to return a wig. Of course, she says. Then they send a servant in shame. Or they keep it, and a replacement must be whispered into existence. And then the unthinkable. Sometimes wigs are recycled, deconstructed, recurled, reassigned. No ceremony, no warning. She hands you a sad bundle of tangled strands. This, she says, was once worn during a royal engagement. Now it's padding for a clergyman's courtroom cap. It's humbling and a little heartbreaking. You think about all the wigs you've seen so far, elegant ones, grotesque ones, magical ones, and now practical ones, anonymous ones, wigs with no glory left. Later that evening, you sit in a borrowed salon chair while a young footman adjusts a borrowed wig on your head. Be still, he says. This one's been cranky lately. You ask what he means. They say wigs keep attitude, he explains. Bad meetings, fights, dismissals. It gets into the curls. You chuckle, but then you look in the mirror. This wig, it does feel heavier. Not physically, emotionally. You can almost hear it sigh. You step into the palace gallery, wearing it. You pass portraits of powdered figures, all frozen mid-glance. You wonder how many of the wigs in those paintings were real. How many were painted from memory? How many have since been brushed into oblivion? The candles flicker. The powder itches. You feel the weight of borrowed nobility pressing down like a ghost. And you whisper, so only the curls can hear, "I know you're not mine." You're standing in front of a mirror again, but this time a wig on your head isn't meant for power or ceremony. It's feminine, delicate, with soft spirals framing your face like the petals of a camellia. The powder is lighter, scented with violet and lemon peel. And you don't feel like yourself, which is precisely the point. Tonight, you're attending a noble woman's literary salon, where the guests are exclusively women, and you, thanks to the loan of this elegant coiffure and a modest coat borrowed from your landlady, are trying something different. You step into the candlelit room. The floor creaks under slippers instead of boots. Voices rise in laughter, soft and sharp, like music written with knives. And everywhere you look, wigs. Curled, stacked, jeweled, but different from the male world you're used to. These wigs aren't about gravitas. They're about display, yes, but also restraint, expectation, and control. You take your seat beside a young baroness whose powdered wig is adorned with silk butterflies. She compliments yours with a practiced smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Yours whispers modesty. She says, sipping tea. Or is that subversion? You're not sure how to answer. As the evening unfolds, it becomes clear. Women's wigs obey a different set of laws. Yes, they're elaborate, but unlike men's, they're rarely meant to project dominance. They're more about negotiated space, being seen just enough to be remembered, but not so much as to be threatened. A duchess across the room wears a garden on her head, tiny wax flowers, a hummingbird feather. It bobs gently when she nods, and somehow the room nods with her. Your host, Lady Fournier, delivers a poem. Her voice is soft, but her presence is vast. Her wig is high, severe, powdered white with streaks of soft gray. Not aged, just wise-looking, intentional. Later, you sit beside her and confess, "I've never worn one like this before." She smiles. It's not the curls that matter. It's what they conceal. You ask what she means. She leans in. Every woman here has wanted to scream at some point during dinner, but we powdered our rage. We braided our silence. And then we turned it into elegance. You suddenly feel the weight of your borrowed curls differently. Lady Fournier continues. Men's wigs are masks of command. Ours are masks of patience. We are taught to wear them like armor, because, unlike men, we cannot remove ours in public. You look around. Some women laugh. Some tilt their heads. But you notice how tight the styles are, how many use pins, how few stray strands dare to escape. You realize that for these women, the wig is both a performance and a prison, and they've mastered it. Historians still argue whether women's wigs in the 18th century were a tool of self-expression or a method of enforced beauty. Likely they were both. Hairstyles could be read like letters, a softer style for mourning, a powdered chignon for chastity, a playful set of ringlets to signal flirtation without scandal. There's a story passed around that one noblewoman, suspected of infidelity, was publicly shamed not by word, but when her rival arrived at court wearing an exact replica of her wig, down to the last ribbon, she fainted on the spot. Later in the evening, a debate unfolds. Should women be allowed to stop wearing wigs entirely? One guest insists wigs are a patriarchal holdover. Another says they're liberation in disguise. Lady Fournier interrupts them both. It's not the wig, she says. It's the expectation that we must always be beautiful, even when we're furious. The room goes quiet. Someone coughs softly. Another reaches for tea. You excuse yourself shortly after. In the privacy of a candlelit corridor, you remove the wig gently. Your scalp tingles. Your neck aches. And you feel lighter. You cradle the borrowed curls in your hands. They're beautiful, but they're not yours. And for a moment, you wonder how many women in history have whispered that same truth to themselves in a mirror powdered, polished, and not quite free. As you step back into the foggy evening, you carry the wig wrapped in silk. It still smells faintly of violets and lemon. And something else now, too: respect. There's a crowd outside the powder shop today, restless, red-faced, loud. You weave your way through, wig tucked under your arm for once, and catch snippets of outrage. Unfair tax. They're charging us to exist. Powder is for the people. Welcome to the powder tax rebellion. It's 1795, and you've landed smack in the middle of one of Britain's more quietly ridiculous chapters of unrest. The government, in a bid to refill its empty coffers after too many wars and too many banquet bills, has imposed a new levy, a tax on hair powder. You duck into a nearby alley as someone throws a bag of flour at a magistrate. The crowd howls. One man waves his powdered wig like a flag, white dust puffing into the air like battlefield smoke. It's not about the powder, really. It's about the principle. For decades, powdered wigs have stood for wealth, tradition, decorum. Now, they're a liability. You learn that under the new law, anyone wishing to wear powdered hair must purchase a certificate, a slip of parchment proving they've paid their due. Without it, you're fined. The fee isn't enormous, but it's humiliating, especially for the middle class, the people who worked so hard to adopt powder fashion as a mark of upward mobility. Now they're being punished for the very thing they hoped would protect them. And just like that, wearing a wig becomes a political statement. Historians still argue whether the powder tax was intended to discourage vanity, raise revenue, or subtly punish a trend that had long since curdled into absurdity. But the outcome was undeniable. People rebelled. Some stopped using powder entirely, walking around in their natural hair with a defiant swagger. Others wore wigs but deliberately left them unpowdered, as if daring tax collectors to do something about it. And a few? They powdered anyway, and proudly displayed forged certificates pinned to their coats. You stop by a print shop where an old man is selling fake licenses for a shilling. Just decorative, he says with a wink. But you'd be surprised how far a bold flourish gets you. You're not surprised at all. You attend a gathering later that week, expecting the usual flurry of formality. But something has changed. People look looser, lighter. The powdered haze that usually hovers over these salons is gone. The wigs are still here, but less grand, less stiff, more human. One man laughs and says, "I used to powder for court, for ceremony. Now I powder for spite." A woman nearby, her hair barely dusted in pale gray, adds, "I only do it on Thursdays." Symbolic resistance. You ask what Thursdays symbolize. She shrugs. Chaos. Even the barbers are talking. Gilbert's shop is offering silent styling now, discreet, unrecorded wig care for those avoiding the tax. He offers you a small packet of powder labeled for personal use only. You pocket it like contraband. You learn there's an emerging movement of natural heads, people who renounce powder entirely, walking into parliament, weddings, even church with bare, unadorned hair. To some, it's revolutionary. To others, deeply rude. A preacher writes an open letter condemning the practice. If the Lord wished us to be bald, he would not have given us ribbons and flour. You try not to laugh. You fail. Meanwhile, satire explodes. Caricatures appear in every shop window. Bloated judges sneezing clouds of tax powder. Powdered generals crushed under scrolls of bureaucracy. One cartoon depicts a man hiding a powdered wig under a chicken. For freshness, the caption reads, "The rebellion spreads." Suddenly, to wear a powdered wig without a certificate is to make a statement. To not wear one, even bolder. And as the months pass, you begin to see fewer and fewer clouds in the streets. More hats, more real hair, more of that chaotic Thursday energy. You start to question your own routine. Each morning, you pause before reaching for your puff. Not out of fear, but curiosity. What does your wig mean now? You're invited to a dinner hosted by a retired admiral, famous for once wearing a wig into battle. He appears bareheaded this time, proudly bald. "I've paid enough taxes," he says. "I refuse to pay for powder." You glance around the table. A few powdered curls remain, but most guests were simple styles, or no wig at all. You wonder if the powder tax backfired. By trying to control vanity, the government may have accidentally stripped of its power. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of the end for wig culture in Britain. But sitting there, sipping wine, watching an unpowdered woman laugh loud enough to shake the table, you start to believe it. Back home, you brush your wig in silence. Not reverently, not nervously, just thoughtfully. You set it on its stand, open the packet of illicit powder Gilbert gave you, and then, slowly, you tip it into the candle. The powder catches, flares, and vanishes in a puff of defiant smoke. No certificate required. The world is changing, and your wig knows it. You feel it every time you walk down a street that once shimmered with powder clouds, and now carries only the scent of chimney soot and wet wool. The age of powdered grandeur is quietly fading. Today, you visit a tailor near Fleet Street. He's known not for his wigs, but for his gossip. As he adjusts your coat hem, he leans in and says, "Did you hear? The Marquis of Drayton's son showed up to court wigless." You blink. "Not a powder in sight," the tailor whispers. "He even bowed." This would have been scandalous a decade ago. Now, just noted, it's not just the youth. Across London, people are shedding their curls slowly, carefully, like snakes slipping out of tradition. They claim it's for comfort, for cost, for hygiene, but you can sense something deeper. Wigs no longer symbolize elegance. They symbolize irrelevance. The revolution in France certainly didn't help. After all, it's difficult to admire powdered aristocrats when you're watching their heads roll, often wig and all. The guillotine doesn't discriminate between real and artificial hair. And in France, wearing a towering coiffure these days is as dangerous as yelling, "I love taxes," in a bakery. You recall that once, powdered wigs were a language. Now they're a liability, a whisper that says, "I belong to the old world." Historians still argue whether the downfall of wig culture was more due to shifting politics, Enlightenment ideals, or simply climate. The late 18th century brought warmer summers. More people chose sweat over starch, and society began to prize naturalism in philosophy, in manners, and increasingly in hairstyles. You visit a bookseller and notice a pamphlet titled "The Clean Crown: Thoughts on Unadorned Heads." Inside, there are illustrations of influential men, poets, scientists, even lawmakers, bareheaded, with smug expressions and strong foreheads. One page shows a side-by-side comparison. Left, a man with an elaborate periwig, labeled "confused." Right, same man, bald, labeled "wise." It's satire, probably, but it sells. That evening, you attend one last formal gathering. Perhaps your final as a member of the powder class. It's a ball, technically, but it feels more like a farewell. The room is beautiful. Chandeliers drip light across polished floors. Music curls through the air like perfume. But the wigs? There are fewer of them now. The ones that remain are toned down, shorter, less flower, less perfume. A woman wears her natural curls, powdered at the tips only. A man has styled his real hair into a modest shape, no mesh required. And then there's you, still powdered, still traditional, still clinging to the idea that this means something. You dance once, twice, but you feel like an antique on display, revered, admired, and gently ignored. At midnight, someone blows out a candle by accident. A small puff of powder drifts across the floor. No one flinches. No one breathes it in with pride. It's just dust now. Back home, you sit in front of the mirror. You remove your wig slowly. Brush out the curls one last time. The powder crackles faintly in the candlelight. You think of everything it's meant to you. Access, disguise, protection, performance. And now, you set it on the stand and stare at your reflection. Your real hair, uneven and slightly damp at the temples. Your forehead, lined from years of posture. You look honest. Maybe that's enough. You lie back, the candle still flickering. Letting go isn't dramatic. It's quiet. You simply decide, tomorrow, no wig, no powder, just you. The fire softens into embers and the air settles. Outside, the city exhales through rain-slick streets and windows fog with sleep. Powder jars lie untouched on vanities. Curls droop gently in the humid night. And somewhere in the distance, a wig stand creaks under the weight of history. You lie still, no longer trying to remember how tightly to tie a ribbon or which scent matches Thursday's mood. The curls are gone, but the stories linger. Of kings who powdered away their shame. Of barbers who stitched identity into wire frames. Of rebels who said no to tax and yes to sweat. You breathe deeply. The air smells of wax, lemon peel, and your own scalp. For once, that feels like enough. No more pretense. No more puff. Just quiet. You roll to one side, your thoughts trailing off like silk ribbon curling to the floor. And as sleep begins to wrap around you, gentle and honest, the last powder settles, and the wigs at last rest. You cross the Atlantic. The air smells sharper here, less perfume, more pine, fewer powdered nobles, more callous hands. You've arrived in early America, where revolution has torn away the old world's wigs and rituals mostly. You're expecting plainness, practicality, and you're not entirely wrong. But as you make your way through bustling Philadelphia streets, something catches your eye. A row of men exiting a courthouse, one of them unmistakably wearing a wig. It's not enormous. It's not even powdered. But it's there. Modest, tight curls. Functional. Familiar. You stop a passerby. Isn't that out of fashion? He shrugs. Old habits. Also, courtrooms are stubborn. And so begins your journey into wig culture in early America, a strange halfway house between powder tradition and revolutionary simplicity. It turns out some of the founding fathers, yes, even the famously stoic ones, wore wigs, or at least owned them. John Adams had a respectable collection. Benjamin Franklin, of course, discarded his early on. Thomas Jefferson, more of a cue-wearing type. That's a long braid tied with ribbon, more ponytail, less bakery display. But the big name everyone wants to talk about is George Washington. And here's the twist. His hair wasn't a wig. Historians still argue whether that's better or worse. Washington's hair was all natural, pulled back, powdered to perfection. Stiff, white, iconic. People saw it and assumed wig. But no, it was meticulously styled, as if he knew even his scalp would one day appear on currency. You visit a museum where one of his dress forms is on display. Jacket, sword, riding boots. But your eyes go straight to the hair mannequin above it, rigid tied and lightly powdered. The plaque reads, General Washington maintained his hair daily, often rising before dawn to do so. You imagine the leader of a revolution seated by candlelight, hair tied back with military precision, starch puff drifting into the shadows like polite defiance. It's poetic, but wigs in America, they never fully rooted. In cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, they appeared in law courts, among judges, and in some clergy. But elsewhere, they quickly fell out of favor. Too European, too elitist, too British. and in a nation that had just fought to free itself from powdered chains. Wearing a peruke could seem like treason on your head. Still, you find out about a few outliers. In Charleston, a portly doctor insists on wearing his London-imported wig to honor Galenic medicine. In Virginia, a judge clings to his powdered curls for tradition. And in New England, a preacher is said to keep a full-bottomed wig in a glass case for sermons about sin. You ask someone why. They shrug. The old world dies slow. You meet a barber, Daniel, who's trying to pivot. Less demand for powder now, he says, sweeping sawdust from his floor. I do pomade, ribbons, and patriotic hairdos. He offers to tie your hair in the new Republican style. It takes 10 minutes. He slicks it back, not the ribbon, and sprinkles a touch of bay rum for scent. You look in the mirror. You look like someone escaping a wig, not someone abandoning it. And that's the energy in early America. Transition, hesitation, identity in flux. A wig might still signal intellect, especially in court. But it also says you haven't caught up, that you're stuck in a London drawing room while the rest of the world is tilling fields and building new cities. You attend a town meeting where no one wears wigs, not even the mayor. Instead, they wear their own hair short-tied or proudly disheveled. One man says, "The only powder I need is gunpowder." No one laughs. This is a place where survival trumps style, where authenticity is armor, and where a clean scalp means you're probably not trying to tax anyone. Still, late at night, as you stroll past shuttered inns and flickering lanterns, you spot a flicker of white in a window above, an elderly man gently brushing out his wig. You pause. In his dim room, he adjusts the curls, powders just a little, and places it reverently on a headstand before bed. Old habits, old dignity, no judgment, just memory. You wonder how long he'll keep doing it. You wonder if he needs to, or just wants to, and as you walk back on the stars, ribbon fluttering at your neck, you realize something profound. In the new world, wigs don't define you, but they still remember you. You're standing in front of a mirror again, but this time there's nothing on your head. No curls, no powder, no ceremonial fluff. Just scalp, hairline, a few stubborn tufts, and they're yours. And strangely, it feels good. Today, you've decided to do what a growing number of men across Europe are doing. Ditch the wig. Entirely. Proudly. And maybe even a little recklessly. It's the dawn of the 19th century now. You can feel in the cut of coats, the sharper lapels, the shift in tone. Elegance is still valued, but suddenly, authenticity is fashionable. Simplicity whispers louder than pomp. And the bare head? It's gaining power. You first notice it at a cafe. A young man walks in with his own short hair combed neatly. No powder, no puff. The room pauses, not with horror, but with curiosity. He orders tea, sits, speaks, and no one faints. You ask the waiter who he is. Poet, he says. Also a dentist. Can't afford powder. Says it distracts from conversation. Later, at a lecture on natural philosophy, the speaker adjusts his spectacles and launches into a discourse about liberty and symmetry, with his own chestnut hair shining proudly under the lamplight. No wig, no apologies. This is Enlightenment scalp, bald or short-haired, free of artifice. A head that says, I think, and increasingly, I do not care to impress you by looking like a powdered pastry. Historians still argue whether this trend began as a response to the French Revolution or simply the logical end to centuries of forehead frosting. Either way, it stuck. Wigs went from being social currency to social clutter. You stopped by a barbershop later that week, expecting the usual puffery. Instead, the shelves are filled with tonics, oils, pomades. One advertises itself as a rational man's blend. You ask the barber what happened to wig powder. He shrugs. Mice got into the barrels. Never replaced them. Fair. You sit in the chair. No wig today, you say. He nods. Trim or transformation? You smile. Both. He works quickly, snips away stray strands, brushes out old residue, and when he's done, he offers you a small hand mirror. You look like yourself, but somehow more awake. That evening, you attend a supper with friends. No one is wearing a wig. There's laughter, bread, disagreements about poetry. At no point does anyone mention powder, lice, or court etiquette. You do, however, hear one man say, "The head breathes better without a garden on it." True. You remember Magda, the wig maker, and her enchanted curls. You wonder what she's doing now. Has she adapted? Is she making something new? Or has she vanished, like Powder Thursdays? You visit her old street. Her shop is gone. In its place, a printmaker. You ask around. A boy tells you Magda moved to the seaside, started making hats. You smile. Of course she did. You walk the city more freely now. You start noticing others like you, the wigless, the reborn. You begin recognizing the bold tilt of a bare head, the confidence in a scalp that has nothing to prove. It's liberating, but it's also bittersweet. You pass a man struggling with a wig, stand near the docks. He's trying to sell it. Genuine horsehair, he says, still holds shape. Nobody stops. He calls out again. Wore it to Parliament once. Got a bill passed. Still no one stops. He finally sets it down beside a crate of salted fish and walks away. You approach, touch the curls. They feel dusty, fragile, forgotten. You pick up the stand, carry it to the edge of the pier, and watch as a gust of sea wind lifts a loose curl into sky, like a powdered feather on the tide of history. You don't toss it, but you don't wear it either. That night, you sleep bareheaded for the first time in years, and you dream not of wigs or powder or whispers. You dream a breeze. You're in a museum now. The lighting is low. The air smells of lacquered wood and old velvet, and the glass cases gleam like secrets waiting to be overheard. This isn't just any exhibit. It's titled The Age of Powdered Dignity. You come full circle. Behind the first pane, a full-bottomed judicial wig, snow white and majestic. The placard explains it belonged to a Lord Chancellor. Beneath it, his robe, crimson, heavy, impossibly formal. A nearby child points and giggles. Why does it look like spaghetti? And just like that, the spell breaks. Because that's what wigs are now. Costume pieces, artifacts, relics. You move along. The next display is a powder puff set gilded with initials. It's satin faded, its bristles stained pale gray. It was once used by a duchess. The powder inside, long since hardened, resembles cold ash. There's a small plaque beside it, used nightly until 1794, donated by her granddaughter, who never wore powder. You pause. A little ache builds in your chest, because the wigs, for all their absurdity, weren't just about status or vanity. They were about effort, ritual, identity. And now they live behind glass. You enter the next room and are hit with a sudden burst of color. A wig from the court of Marie Antoinette, enormous, feathered, curved like a ship's prow. Miniature fruit dangles from the sides. You laugh, quietly, then realize you're not alone. A tour guide leads a small group of visitors. She gestures toward the wig. This style was worn during France's final years of royal decadence. Ironically, while people starved, aristocrats wore food on their heads. One man snorts. Another nods solemnly. You trail behind them, absorbing whispers. Can you imagine wearing that to work? Looks itchy, Fashion really was a form of madness, wasn't it? You find yourself whispering, too. Yes, but it made sense at the time. Historians still argue whether wigs faded because of revolution, vanity fatigue, or a hygiene awakening. But here in the museum, the why seems less important than the feeling, a collective sigh from the past, an acceptance of closure. In the next room, something unexpected. A television screen plays courtroom footage from modern-day Britain. And there they are, wigs, not full-bottomed or glittering with jewels, but still there, clean, white, modest, worn by barristers and judges who sit beneath fluorescent lights, holding centuries of tradition in place with plastic pins. It's jarring to see something so theatrical existing in a world of email and electric fans. You watch a defense attorney argue calmly, her wig perched neatly atop short brown hair. The curls don't move, but her eyes do, sharp, confident, precise. You find yourself staring, not in mockery, but admiration, because while the powdered world may have ended, echoes remain. You leave the screen behind and enter a final corridor, small glass shelves lined with Halloween wigs. Cheap, nylon, comically overcurled. One is labeled 18th century lawyer. Another, French court queen. The last simply reads founding father. It's absurd, but also affectionate. People still wear wigs, for theater, for fun, for nostalgia. They still laugh. They still imitate. Because deep down, part of us is still charmed by the idea of transformation, of putting something on and becoming someone else. You exit the museum and walk into the chill dusk. The city buzzes around you. Neon signs, rushing cars, a woman passing by with pink hair and headphones, not powdered, but expressive. You think, maybe we never stopped wearing wigs. Maybe we just changed what we called them. Extensions, hats, profiles, personas, new names for an old instinct, to shape how we're seen, to cover what we fear, to pretend just long enough that we fit. You smile and keep walking. You're home now, your real home, not a tavern room, not a borrowed salon, but the quiet, lived-in space that has seen you with and without your wig. And tonight, you're alone with it. Just it. One final time. You set it gently on the table. Not as a relic. Not as a joke. Just as something that meant something for a long time. You brush it once. Twice. And as the dust lifts, you begin to remember not just the weight, but the purpose. This wig wasn't always a burden. Once it was a disguise, a shield, a voice you didn't know you had. It let you walk into rooms where your real hair wasn't enough. It let you speak like a scholar, stand like a judge, flirt like a noble. You weren't always pretending. Sometimes you were just becoming. You sit and take stock of curls, threads, powders past, the odd rituals, the awkward compliments, the mistakes, the itching, the laughter, the absurd, ridiculous elegance of it all. You remember the boy outside the courtroom who cried from talc allergies, the woman who wore an orchard on her head, the powdered protester screaming, "Tax this," with a wig in one hand and a tin badge in the other. You think of Magda, sewing secrets into her fox fur concoctions, of Lord Ashcombe's tragic curls, of George Washington's powdered butt real hair, of Lady Fournier and her quiet, coil fury beneath a crown of etiquette, all of it woven, powdered, pinned, and performed. Historians still argue whether wigs truly mattered. You don't, because you know they did. Maybe not for beauty, maybe not for health, maybe not for sense, but for the same reason people tattoo skin, pierce ears, or pick outfits that match their mood. To say, this is who I am right now. And when right now changes, you change with it. You reach into the drawer and find a simple hat. Cloth, plain, worn. You tuck the wig away, not in shame or reverence, but as you an old costume, not for burning, not for display, just for keeping. Quietly, in case you ever want to remember who you were, for a little while, you look at yourself in the mirror, bareheaded, still strange, still whole, and as you turn out the lights, you feel something you didn't expect. Gratitude for the wig that let you try, and for the moment when you didn't need to anymore. The room is quiet. Candlelight flickers, painting soft golden arcs on the walls. Outside, wind curls through the eaves like a whispered memory. Inside, you sit by the table, fingers resting lightly on the final strands of your old wig. It's not nostalgia that keeps you here, it's reflection. You run your thumb along the inner band, feel the places worn thin from years of careful wearing, rushed adjusting, nervous fidgeting. You trace a small powder stain in the lining, probably rose water, maybe clove, maybe just time. This thing, ridiculous as it may seem now, once carried your name. Or rather, it gave you a name when yours wasn't being heard. In courtrooms, in parlors, on city steps. It was your entrance ticket, your bluff, your signature. And now, it's quiet, but even silence remembers. You think of what wigs really were, not objects, but ideas worn out loud, extensions of desire, of power, of self, built from goat hair, powdered with privilege, stiffened with ritual and fear and love. You recall how even the poorest man once saved for one, how some slept with their wigs beside them, while others tossed them in rivers when freedom finally called louder than fashion. Historians still argue whether wigs were ever truly necessary. But you've lived inside that question. You know the answer isn't yes or no. It's this: they were needed until they weren't. That's all, because identity is a moving target. What elevates you one century weighs you down the next, and what you discard in relief, someone else may one day find in awe. You rise, slow and steady. Wrap the wig in a piece of linen. Fold it once. Place it on the highest shelf of your wardrobe, not out of reach, just out of the way. Then you open the window. Cool air slips across your scalp. Not shocking, not unwelcome, just new. A bell chimes in the distance. Maybe midnight, maybe earlier. Doesn't matter. You turn out the lamp, and for the first time in years, you sleep with nothing on your head but peace.